Welcome back, everybody, to the Fighting for Freedom podcast. I just want to say thank you to everybody for all your love and support. You guys have helped this channel grow dramatically. If you could please, at this time, drop us a like, comment, subscribe, share our podcast, turn on those bell notifications, and leave us a rating and good review. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Fighting for freedom, one podcast at a time.
What up? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode on the Fighting for Freedom podcast. Today we have Rachel Oswalt on board to give us some insight on her story, her time in the service, and her battle, ongoing and past mental health issues. Rachel, what's up? Thank you so much for coming out here today.
Hey, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. We kind of linked through social media, and I was like, I feel like we're kind of doing the same thing, maybe writing the same book with a different cover.
Yeah.
I was like, this will be great for us to, you'd come on my podcast, give a chance to tell your stories, and then I come on yours and give a chance to tell my stories, and just have our communities kind of maybe form one alliance in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love it. There's so many of us in the military mental health space. I found just being in this space in the last 2 years, podcasting alone, and it's so cool to be able to share that message on bigger platforms to more audiences, and just continue to have these conversations, because that's so important.
Yeah, I like to stress. People say like, what do you do on your podcast? And I get that question all the time, right? They see Fighting for Freedom and they're like, well, what is that? And I'm like, well, it's for the military. I don't know the exact number of how many people are in the military, but not everybody in the military is like a Medal of Honor recipient or a Purple Heart recipient or, some crazy Joe, But what about the rest of the people that go through the daily stuff? The people that, are in jeopardy of losing their career, maybe, their marriage, maybe their car, like things that everyday people go through. I want other people to be able to hear that story and be like, you know what? I'm not alone. This guy went through it. Rachel went through it. Vinny went through it. And eventually everything will be okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Rachel, let's dive into you. Your story. Where are you from? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
So I'm born and raised in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa, spent 22 years of my life there before I left for the Navy. And, I always say now, Iowa will always be home, but I will never live there again. I'm on the West Coast now, and Iowa's just too landlocked, and it's Iowa. So.
Yeah, it's a little too slow. Where are you currently right now?
I'm in Washington State. I've been here since 2015.
Oh, okay. Well, for Christmas, I hope you got an umbrella, because it rains. It rains a lot there.
So I'm on Whidbey Island, and our weather patterns are pretty different than like Seattle area.
Okay.
So I don't get down to Seattle a lot, because that's a whole different world. But it actually has not been too rainy this year, thankfully. Yesterday was like a spring day. It was actually gorgeous outside, and so the weather's kind of been different this year. Every once in a while, we'll get like a snowy day for a few years in a row. I don't know. I was on detachments for a lot. I mean, most of the time that I was in the Navy around this time of the year, I wasn't even like in the area, and so I missed out on a lot of the crappy weather. Thankfully, I was in like Bahrain in like 80-degree weather.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Yeah.
You're spending all of that big per diem on absolutely nothing, because everything is so cheap out there.
I was in Isa, Bahrain, so $3.50 a day.
Oh, wow. That's like whenever we went to, if we would get deployed to like Japan or something like that, like our mainland deployment, you would get $3.50 a day, but they also took your BAS. So it was like, well, I'm literally getting paid nothing to be out here. So like, what's the,
Yeah, not worth it.
It is.
It's like an hour.
It is what it is for the.
Yeah, an hour up north in Manama, people were getting like $3,000 a month and like big ballin', and we're down there like can we have? And they're like, no, you got a galley. And I'm like, but this is like the world's driest chicken. And then I was there during COVID too at one point. So it was like box meals and like, here's a piece of dry chicken and some peas and a few grains of rice. Here you go. Enjoy your $3 a
and
day.
the people dropping it off at your doorstep because you're in quarantine are like some E3 and below who just don't care and don't want to be here. And the bag, they're just like shaking the bag as much as they like. By the time the food goes from the galley, because I was in exactly the same like predicament as you, where I was like stuck on deployment, I guess you could say, for COVID. And, you know, all of our meals, when we weren't able to go to the galley and like pick up like a grab bag, they would drop it off at our door.
Yep.
But I was on like the third deck of like the E5 barracks. So,
oh my God.
And there's no elevator. Yeah, there's no elevator. So they would have to carry these big boxes of food all the way up the stairs. And by the time the food got to me, it was just like, ugh.
Yep.
I was like,
it's little like quirks of the military that no one really talks about that like you kind of forget about until it comes up in conversation, and it's like, man, what a weird time to be alive. That's one of them.
Yeah. Well, also that was like one of like the peaks for mental health aspect in the military.
Yes.
Like battling COVID. Do you have some insight you can share on maybe if you or you know of somebody or, you know, just any insight into COVID and mental health issues?
Oh, absolutely. I've had friends. So when the whole COVID thing first happened, I mean, I got out of the military in September 2021. So I think that's right around the time that things were starting to shift in COVID. And I'm talking more about like the vaccine when I say shift. I decided to get out at my EAOS instead of extend for a maternity tour because I know slightly controversial for some, but I didn't want I had this fear that a vaccine was going to be mandated, and I was pregnant and I wasn't comfortable injecting myself with that, especially being pregnant. And so I decided to get out kind of ahead of the curve because I had this feeling that was going to happen, and it did. Probably a few months later, which was interesting because my chief at the time was like, oh no, vaccine, that's like way down the road. Mandation, like way down the road. Like you're good. Because we were talking me extending 2 more years. And so I got out. However, I was following a lot of my friends that were serving in the military, and I know a few friends that got kicked out. I mean, the kick out process took so long that one of them I think is still in, but she is getting out, and she decided that she's no longer doing time in the Navy because of how much that time period affected her. I actually did a podcast episode about one of my friends that served during the time of COVID and how that mentally affected her because she too experienced a lot of just disrespect and people treating her some type of way because she decided that she didn't want to get the vaccine and that she would rather get kicked out of the military than put something in her body that she didn't want to. And so that I think was like the biggest mental health related issue that happened during COVID, probably even more than quarantine. And honestly, like quarantine for me, ROM, is what they called it. But I enjoyed ROM because I was like, give me 14 days off of work. Like I came back from Bahrain and like, I'm not going to lie, I did not stay in my house the entire time. Because they make you test and stuff anyway. And it's like, well, if I'm negative anyway, and I got to get my groceries. Because the way that they were doing it was like the people that lived in the barracks when you came back, they had to have people deliver back because you can control them more, right? But I did not live on base in the barracks. So they're like, okay, well, if you live off base and you're in ROM, you can go and get your groceries and your necessities, but make sure you go right back home because you're in quarantine. I'm like, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of quarantine? But they also can't be like, Sailor Joe Schmuckatelli is going to bring you groceries 3 times a day or bring you food 3 times a day because you can't leave your place. So, I don't think that from like a quarantine or a ROM standpoint, that mental health, at least for me, was really affected like that. I think when we talk about like the isolation and definitely being on detachment during COVID and that unknown of like, hey, you were supposed to go home this month, but global flights are canceled. So it was such a like week to week thing of like, hey, what's going on now? Are we going home in 3 weeks? Are we going home in 4 months? I mean, we really had no idea for a time period. And so that was
Yep.
that was an interesting time period that I'm sure affected quite a few people. I know it affected me, not on like a super major level. It was just kind of like that weird unknown thing. But I think mental health was very
Mm-hmm.
multifaceted during the COVID time period. There's something else I wanted to bring up too, but I forgot. Um, it might come back to me.
You're good.
But there's so many things during COVID that affected mental health on different ways. But I also want to hit on how it positively affected people's mental health, because I think for a lot of people, COVID gave a lot of human beings the time to finally connect with themselves, that hadn't had that time in
Mm-hmm.
a really long time. It allowed people the opportunity to slow down. And so I don't think it was fully a negative thing. There was a lot of positives for me that came out of COVID too. I mean, my student loans were at 0% for like 3 years. Financially, for a lot of people, that was a huge burden off of their chest just to have that pause and that break. And so, we can really look at both sides of it and say that, yeah, it was a negative experience, but a lot of people also came out of COVID with a very positive mindset because it really gave the world a chance to reset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. It's like that, like you said, there is the positives and negatives towards it, right? Like that whole isolation aspect of like, hey, like I'm sorry, but you have to like be on ROM for 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
But then like they have all these programs to get sailors like out of their barracks rooms and like do fun things for free, like the MWR, which is like the Navy version, and then there's the Air Force and the Army and the Marines version. But then when you tell them, hey, like you have to like stay in your room, people get creative, and I've seen people that like take up like new things. Like there was
Yeah.
this one of my sailors like was like, I'm so bored, I have nothing to do, so they took on yoga, and they ended up getting like their yoga certification, like when they were able to like come out of like isolation and all that.
Yeah.
And I was like,
That's
good for you,
awesome.
you actually did something rather than just play video games the whole time.
Right. Right. Everyone had a
Yeah.
Nintendo Switch, I think, when we were on debt. So that's what a lot of people did, was just played their Switch. But yeah, I think
There you go.
the rough thing I will say is, like, in Bahrain, at least, the gym shut down,
Mm-hmm.
and the gym was like the only thing to do in Isa. Or the
Yep.
gym was like, oh, we're only going to allow like 2 people in at a time for an hour at a time. And so that was a bit of a pain. But there were still ways to get
Yeah.
creative. I mean, workout outside. They had kind of an
Mm-hmm.
outdoor area. And so, yeah, I mean, the creativity aspect of it, forcing humans to think outside the box, I think that was definitely a positive, as much as it may have seemed negative in some aspects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it definitely gave people more of like the think outside the box aspect, like especially for where I was. Like my command was like, okay, like physical fitness for the Seabees is like kind of like a thing, right?
Yeah.
But the gym was shut down. Like the locals kind of ran the gym, and we had like the MWR who helped like run the gym as well. But we also had like this big TRX like gym on the outside. So what we
Yeah.
did was we kind of like roped it off, because I was a CFL at the time, and all the CFLs would stand like 2 hour watches like in rotation, like during after hour work, and we would have like a certain amount of people come in and be able to like use the equipment. Of course, you had to like wear a mask and like keep your social distancing,
Yeah.
and clean the equipment. That was kind of nice. People were like forced to clean the equipment when they're done
For
with it,
once.
because we all know
Yeah.
that one. Yeah, we all know that one person that goes to the gym and you'll see them get their back sweat all over a bench and then just get up
Sweats
and walk away. And
on
I'm like,
everything.
yeah, I'm like, dude, you know yourself. Like, obviously, like you're
Yeah.
literally leaving a puddle everywhere. But
Yes.
no, it was definitely it was good to see, like the creativity come out in things, And
Yes.
I myself, I was What I what I wanted to touch on, what was kind of funny was you mentioned like getting groceries and stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
So what we did, we would have like our first classes, because I was E5 at the time, right? So we would have like our first classes or chiefs be like, hey, if you need anything, just hit me up and I'll go get it for you and I'll bring it to you. And I was like,
Yeah.
doesn't that defeat the whole purpose of like me, like you going out? Like, why can't
Yep.
I just go get it? It
Yep.
was like their like scapegoat to like leaving.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
I would go on runs, like go get fresh air, because for like the first couple of days it was nice, because like it was like a party. Me, my roommates, my friends would come over and we would just get drunk and have a great time. But then after like day 4, I was like, dude, I want to go outside. I was like, I need some air.
Yeah.
I need some water.
Yeah. It was interesting experiencing it from overseas because the US just looked ridiculous with the whole toilet paper crisis. And I'm like, Bahrain
Yeah.
is like a kingdom. They got a king and stuff, right? So it's completely there. They're like, listen, you're gonna follow these rules or you're just gonna get arrested. There's no in
Yeah.
between. Whereas the US is like, oh well, it's a free for all. And so it was
Yeah.
just it's interesting.
Whoever has the most toilet paper is king at this point.
Yeah, I did not understand
Yeah.
that. Did not get it.
No, I wasn't there, luckily, for that. I was one of those people that we were supposed to come home in March, April of 2020. That was when our 6-month deployment ended. But sadly, it got extended for a month, and then 2 months, and then 2 more months, and then 3 months. And we didn't end up coming home and for like till like our 11th month mark. Some people even
Wow.
12th month because they had to do like the whole turnover and all that stuff. Yeah, so Chaps was definitely making his rounds, making sure everybody was like doing all right. But
Wow.
and then not only do we have like this big battle going on, but we have the people who also, deferred the vaccine as well.
Yeah.
And some of these troops like worked for me, right? And not to say like just because like I'm like their chain of command, like I'm their boss in a way, like I have any like insight into them and their life. Like I'm a single guy, with BAH, but some of the guys that worked for me like had a wife and had kids, and they're in jeopardy right now of like losing everything they worked for in the military. Because there was a point where they were like, "Hey, your GI Bill, you're not going to get it. All of your certificates and accreditations you got while you were in, not going to happen." And it was like it just hit them, and like they came to me and they're like, "Yo, like what's going on?" And I was like, "Dude, this is way above me and my power. Like I have no clue, but just know that everything will be fine, right? You hear some really bad news today, tomorrow you're going to hear good news." And that kind of stuck with them a little bit. And it in the end, it all worked out for them. They got their honorable discharge. They got to keep all their benefits. Everything was the same. They just opted not to get it. It was a rushed process, right? Because you planned to, hey, I'm going to get out in 2 years, and all of a sudden that took 2 years turns into 4 months, and you're like, well, now what?
Right.
But luckily, knock on wood, they're all doing okay right now. So
that's good. That's good. Yeah, I think the other thing I was going to say is that I knew one person that lost her job in the military because she got myocarditis because she was hesitant on the vaccine. She got it anyway, and then she's out. But she seems to be doing. I haven't talked to her in a while. She seems to be doing okay, and she seems happy. And so the point that you brought up about it's going to be okay, and that it might suck today, but it's going to be okay tomorrow. I think telling people that is so important because even if it's not going to be okay tomorrow, our mindset about the situation, it matters so much in what the outcome of the situation is, because there are people who can go through the world's worst possible scenario and their mindset surrounding it is, oh, everything's fine, everything's okay. And so for them, it's not the world's worst scenario. Whereas other people already have a mentality of, oh my God, tomorrow's going to suck. Tomorrow's going to be a crappy day. I don't know what's going to happen. And they create fear and anxiety within themselves. So then they actually end up manifesting that crappy day the next day because their mind has already set them up for that. And so I think it's really cool that you did that. And it's a really awesome leadership quality that is simple, but not a lot of people have it. Because I think a lot of people do like to be in control, or a lot of people went in bully mode during COVID, and outside of COVID, it's kind of a leadership issue throughout the military. But no, that's really cool, and I wanted to point out that I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, hell yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, like at that point, like I did get the vaccine. I was kind of like told, like, hey, if you get the vaccine, we're gonna send you on a detachment, and you're gonna make hundreds of dollars a day. I was like, easy. That was my mentality. Because I was just like, vaccine, it is what it is. Like, my whole family was kind of like, I don't say forced to get it, but a lot of my family are like cops back in New York. So they had to get the vaccine. So I was like, if my mom gets it, it can't be that bad. You know what I mean? So when I got it, and like my career, or, nothing was in really jeopardy for me, it was easier for me as a leader to look at these guys and like know what they're going through and be like, yo, man, like you everything's gonna be okay. And they would also have like these big, like, not focus groups, but they would bring everybody who decided to not get the vaccine into a classroom together and talk to them like as a group rather than individually, which I
Yeah.
think was very good to know, like, hey, like, there's 50 of us in this room,
Yeah.
and I have no kids, I have no job, I live in the barracks. You know what I mean? Like, I'm chilling, but the guy behind me has a wife and two
Yeah.
kids, just bought a house, so like things could be worse, right? And
Right.
everybody in that room that I've talked to, that I still keep in contact at least, is still doing phenomenal. They're still, living out their dream, and they're having the best time of their life. So,
That's awesome.
knock on wood, and shout out to all those people who overcame that aspect of mental health on deployment, being down low in a foxhole to, just living their life, man. It's really beautiful to see,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Rachel, so I want to kind of get back to you and your career, right? So
Yeah, we went off on a
Iowa.
bit of a tangent. It's
No,
all
that
good,
hey,
though.
you know what though? Like that's why we're here, man. Is to hear each other's stories and just, I don't know. It's dope. It's dope. But let's get back to Iowa and Rachel. Iowa, is that like a military like state? Is it like where you were located?
No.
Is that like a
No.
yeah, is it just cornfields and
Yeah, so it's not just cornfields. I will say that. A lot of people think that, or a lot of people don't even know where it is. So, geographically, for those of you who are listening or watching and do not know, Iowa is literally smack in the middle of the United States. So, I was taught that, like, if you look at the middle states, it forms like the shape of an elf. We called the elf Mimel when I was in like elementary school because it's like a Minnesota, Iowa. I don't know the state. Yeah, I'm not even gonna go there. But
yeah,
like
your
right,
third grade teacher is probably like,
yeah,
yeah.
I was homeschooled, so
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Um, but Iowa is smack in the middle of the U.S. They call it the heartland of the U.S. because it's smack in the middle. If you're in the Navy,
Mhm.
you went to boot camp in Illinois, Iowa's right next door to it. I literally took like a 3-hour flight. Yeah, probably like a 3-hour flight to Great Lakes from Iowa. But the reason I joined the Navy wasn't because I was in a military town or had a super military family like a lot of people that join the Navy. I had actually joined the Navy initially in 2012 because I was in a really toxic relationship and I was working a bunch of jobs. My boyfriend at the time was not contributing. He didn't have health insurance. And so my like great idea was, oh, well, like the Army and the Navy and all these people are offering enlistment bonuses and they offer health insurance. So maybe if I just joined the military, because at that time I was still so young, I didn't really have anything like tying me down other than my toxic relationship. So I
Mhm.
was like, maybe I just join the military and then the chunk of money and the health insurance and all these things will help me out of my situation. Well, it probably would have had I broken up with the toxic boyfriend, but I realized that because we were dating, like health insurance wouldn't have really done anything for him. And I was like, oh, well, he's the one that needed it, not me. So, guess I will just drop out of the delayed entry program. So I dropped out of the Navy delayed entry program. And I'm glad I did. And the reason I say this is because I was going to be joining as an E1 because I still owed money to the university I went to. So I could not get my transcripts. Therefore, I could not start as an E2. They also wanted to have me join as an HT, which I hear now is like the plumber of the Navy. And
Yep.
yeah, not about it. Not about it. So I ended up dropping out of DEP and they had this talk with me. I had to talk to like the chief and whatever in the station. And they're like, yeah, you got to sign this form. You can never join the Navy again. I'm like, cool. Wasn't that invested anyway. It is what it is. Well, 2 years later, surprise, surprise, recruiter calls me back and is like, hey, we need people in the Navy, and we're offering waivers right now for the people who dropped out of DEP. And I was like, okay. And he's like, but you only have like a week to make the decision if you want to do this. And I was like, well, shoot, just got out of toxic relationship not that long ago.
Yep.
Just met new guy who is now my husband, actually.
Oh, nice.
But at the time, I had this mentality of like, listen, I'm not going to let a man hold me back ever again. I'm going to
Mhm.
make decisions for myself. Like, what a cool opportunity to just do something completely different with my life. And so that's the mentality that I had and why I decided to join the Navy. 2014, I didn't actually ship out to boot camp until 2015. But the path that I chose for me was very empowering, because instead of an HT, I was like, well, if I'm going to join on my own terms, I want to pick something on my own terms. And so I actually decided that I wanted to go spec ops. And so I wanted to go either air rescue swimmer or diver. Spoiler alert, I didn't end up making either of those. But the process over that next year, from when I joined the delayed entry program to when I shipped for boot camp, like I grew so much as a person in that year, and it prepped me so much for boot camp, because I could do a PST for spec ops before I left for Navy boot camp, which is just for like your regular everyday sailor. And so boot camp physically, I actually excelled physically there, and I improved quite a bit when I left boot camp, because of the fact that I had prepared for the year leading up to it, which I probably would not have done had I not wanted to go for a spec ops job. But I took my run time, a mile and a half, from like 15 minutes and 30 seconds down to like 11 minutes and 30 seconds. I went from not being able to do a single pull-up to 6 dead hang pull-ups. I went from like barely being able to pass the push-ups and sit-ups to doing like 50 of them. And the PST itself is like you swim. I think it was 500 yards swimming, which swimming was easy for me because I used to be a swimmer. And then it was the push-ups, it was the sit-ups, and then it was pull-ups, and then it was a run. And so the run was always the very last part. And so it made it so much harder for me, especially being in Iowa. A lot of times we were running indoors in the winter. And so the gym would be like a YMCA gym with like not an actual track, but one of those like second floor concrete, like you have to run 40 laps to hit a mile and a half. So it was very, very challenging
just
for
like
me.
boot camp.
Yes. And then like actually worse than boot camp. But then like getting out and practicing in the dead of winter when it's cold outside, and I don't want to get out of my cozy house to go run a mile and a half at the track because there's snow on the ground and it's hard. I would actually use a lot of motivational videos, a lot of ET, those random YouTube motivational videos that I still listen to this day to push me through that time period. And so it was a very interesting period in my life. But that was kind of the roots of me joining the Navy. Was I joined before I was told I couldn't join again. Joined again, decided that I wanted to do this thing. When I didn't end up making it, I shipped off as an avionics technician, ended up being an AT eye level, worked on both intermediate and organizational level when I served. But yeah, the job that I picked wasn't the job that I wanted, what I ultimately ended up doing. But the process of trying to get the job
wanted to be a HT.
Right. Yeah. I found out later that MEPS did not do my depth perception test. And so that's why no aviation jobs popped up on like, the little job sheet that they show you where they're like, hey, these are all the jobs. Yeah. Someone purposely left the depth perception off. So they're like, oh, well, your ASVAB is a 79, but you only have all these like low, like bottom of the barrel jobs. It's like HT. I don't even know what the other ones were, but they were like the crap jobs that no one wanted. And so someone was skewing the system. I don't know who it was.
Yep.
We're not pointing fingers here, but I'm just saying, like when I took that depth perception, because they're like, oh, you want to be spec ops? I was the only female in Iowa that was going for a spec ops job. So, it's not like they could be like, oh, sorry, you can't do aviation. They're just like, oh, nope, looks like we didn't do this one test. I'm like, well, I'm glad we caught that, because I have a feeling I would not have liked being an HT. So
no. From what I hear, so by trade, for the Navy, I'm a plumber, right? But I'm a plumber in the Seabees, which is like, on land and vertical construction, nothing to do with a ship. I've never seen them. Actually, I'm lying. I've seen them one time in Norfolk, but they were like pulled in the port, and I was like, holy shit, that's what a ship looks like? That's wild.
Yeah, I've never been on one either.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was the P3 community.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but HTs well, then you would have been asked out if you went HT, because you would have 100% been on a ship, and you would have been unclocking toilets and No pun intended. It would have been a really shitty job.
Yeah. They say that you're not a real HT until you get human feces on you at some point. Someone told me that one time, and I was like, yeah, I'm good. I am good.
Yeah.
I thought they do rank up faster. At least when I was in, they were ranking up a lot faster than ATs were. But I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Keep the money.
Yeah.
Not
I'd
job
rather
for
do
me.
what I love. Yeah. I'd rather do what I love for $1 a day than do what I hate for $100 a day.
Right.
Especially if that $100 includes human feces being all
Right.
over me. I'm good.
Yes. Yeah, I'm good.
No. Okay, so you go through boot camp and you're in like one of those like 800 divisions, right? You're in one of those higher divisions.
No, because I was not there for spec ops. I was just there as like a regular sailor.
Oh, gotcha.
What division? I was in 168 was my division. 167 and 168 were a brother and sister divs. So yeah, it wasn't anything
Wow.
special. It was just like the regular version of boot camp, which I guess has changed a lot over the last few years from what I hear now.
Yeah.
They're allowing cell phones now in boot camp, which there's
No
been
way.
mixed conversations.
Really?
Yeah, they are actually. They
Huh.
I think they recently started implementing that, and I'll say, talking about all the controversial things today. And this shouldn't be controversial, but it is online. Like there's heated arguments online about this. So a lot of people think it's a good thing because they're like, oh, well, people are more connected to home, people are less depressed. But here's the thing. I, looking back, appreciated that boot camp gave me 8 weeks to disconnect with the world. I appreciated that I was not attached to my cell phone and that I could just focus on other things. And A, it proved to me that I could do it. But B, I think that if I was in boot camp and then even for one day in that week, I was checking my social media and I saw something that threw off my mindset, it would have completely changed the trajectory of how I went through boot camp. So I'm grateful for no cell phone time. And like, yeah, we could still talk at home. There's the payphones. Like, I'm sure they still exist there.
Yeah.
But something about knowing that you are completely disconnected from the world, like it creates a different kind of person than saying like, oh yeah, now for an hour on Sundays, you can scroll through your cell phone. Like it doesn't sit right with me.
Nope, I 100% agree. There is nothing more that I looked forward to in boot camp than that like week 3 phone call, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just the mentality of like my RDC being like, well, if you fuck up again, you're not getting your damn phone call. It kind of gave you the motivation and like the I don't like the strictness. I can't think of the word right now to like be like, all right, I got to do what I got to do. I got to get through to this because I want my phone call.
Right.
They used it as like, I don't want to say leverage because they always let you get your phone call. If anyone listening going to boot camp, don't worry, you'll get your phone call, you'll be fine. But just the fact that like it was used as a tool to kind of mold you into like becoming like a sailor. You know what I mean? It was like hey, like Sundays, yeah, you get like your downtime. You can do whatever you want, but just know as soon as that time is over, you go right back to being a recruit in the United States Navy,
right?
Which was dope.
Right.
There was actually some divisions because I went to boot camp in 2017 of August, and there was one ship. I think it was ship 3. They got like a tablet, and they were able to use that on Sundays, and they were able to like send emails.
Yeah, I remember they were talking.
I'm over here like, I didn't even get I don't even have cereal, and you guys have iPads.
They were talking about that. On? I forgot about that because we had the book. Like the thick book that like taught you everything, which I took it at a boot camp with me, handbook. But they should have just like recycled those and handed them to the next set of recruits that came in until that book was like complete garbage, which that would have made sense to me. Their whole idea behind it was, so backtracking a little bit, when I joined in 2015, when I left, they told me they're trying to make the military more like corporate America. So that was one of the things that they talked about. My chief in my division was actually like on that committee that was talking about bringing iPads in. And I had forgot about this till you just brought it up. But I remember thinking like, what the heck? Like an iPad? Like that's okay. I understand why, because like we're saving paper, blah, blah, blah. There's obviously electronics have their own set of issues compared to paper. I don't know. Something about boot camp feeling more old school, and I'm not talking old school like abusing people old school, because back way back in the day when no one knew what was going on at boot camp before the YouTube series about RTC, Great Lakes and stuff. Like when people had no idea what they were getting into, creating this like anticipation and anxiety. I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but like anticipation behind like what's boot camp going to be. This is going to be the hardest experience of my life. Like I'm so excited. I didn't feel like I got that satisfaction leaving Great Lakes, and I don't know if your experience was similar, but like I felt like, and it probably feels even more this way now for people. Like I just felt like it wasn't the hardest thing that I had ever done in my life. Like it was harder in my mind anticipating it than the actual experience was being there, and so it kind of saddens me to see
time kind of just like
more
goes on, and you're like,
yeah, more like I don't know. It just seems like it's moving so much towards corporate America that it's losing the military feel that it should have. And I haven't gone through it, so obviously like I can only speak from the outside looking in. I'd be curious to talk to someone who has gone through boot camp, like graduated yesterday. And hear what their thoughts are. But yeah,
definitely.
It's different.
Yeah. Just know, that's like one of my goals is like I want to have someone who like just graduated boot camp and like hear their stories and let them know like, yo, you can talk about certain things to like a certain degree, right? Like I'm still active duty, so for me it's like, I still play OPSEC by the book. I still play, all the big boy rules, no politics, no race, religion, because that's just things that personally I don't want to hear and I don't want to talk about. And, other people just don't really care for anyway.
Right.
So if you are active duty and you are listening to this, just know you can talk about things on platforms, especially on my platform, because I myself am active duty. But hit up me and Rachel if you just got out of boot camp. We're honestly curious, whether it's offline or online. Yeah. Because I want to know if you got your phones.
If we hear something that's a no, we'll just edit it out. It's okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, just know my 8-year E5 career is a lot more important to me than your 2-day E1 career. So I got you covered. Don't worry.
I get it. I mean, if someone had hit me up day one after I graduated, I would have been like, no, because you're still very much in like military mode. Like you still feel like you need to greet everyone as like petty officer and chief and salute every single officer instead of just like walking across the street and avoiding them. So,
Oh my God. So many stories of just like you see like a officer like coming out of the next and you're like walking in, but you walk a little faster so you can take your cover off real quicker.
Yeah. And then it gets to the point, honestly, at least on the West Coast, like people are very chill out here. I'd never served at an East Coast command. I heard that they were a lot more strict, but at least on the West Coast, like even in squadrons, like people are very chill with each other. You're not like saluting. I mean, you still salute officers. There's still a level of respect, but everyone's just kind of talking to each other like friends. And I really liked that dynamic. Now, granted, it changed depending on who the leadership was, because some leaders come off the boat and they're like, "This is how the Navy is supposed to be." Okay, but for the most part, I would say like people, like I had officers that like to this day, if I see them on the internet or something, they're like, "Hey, Rachel," it's not weird in any way. Whereas some people, it's still just like, I don't know, people get an ego. So
yeah, that was one thing I instilled with me and like me being like a leader, like in a leadership role was, like time and place for everything, right? But you don't know everybody's story. You don't know how they woke up that morning. So I treated everybody the same. And what I like to do, obviously time and place, right? But I always use a first name for everybody.
Yes.
Whenever I introduced myself to somebody, I was like, "How you doing? I'm Vinny." And they were like,
they're like, "Petty
like,
officer,
what's your
what?"
rate? Or Yeah. I was like I'm Vinny, right? Yeah. But obviously, if Chief's around, I'm UT2 Harem, okay? Yeah. And they were like, it was kind of like that connectivity of like, hey, like I'm human, you're human, we're both here. Like, if you need anything, you let me know. If it's work related, I probably don't care. But if it's not work related and it's personal related, if you need to talk to me, I got you. Like, and that kind of instilled where when you see someone's having a bad day, you can go up to that person and be like, "Yo, you good?" And they're more inclined to open up to you and tell you and, get that weight off their shoulders because they know that you have like that personal connection with them. Not like you're my leadership, you're my, It's like
Right.
like this guy's he's chill, so I feel
Yeah.
comfortable talking to him.
Yeah. And I would say, like, even on the
Yeah.
outside, being a veteran now, like, there is still this, like, subliminal hesitancy, I guess would be the word, where, like, if I come across someone who is higher rank in the military, like, I still, in my head, that my first thought is, they're like an E9, or they're like an O10 or something. And I have to remind myself that, like, first of all, Rachel, you're not in the military anymore. Second of all, they're just people, and they've always just been people. The military and certain
Yeah.
people create so much of this mentality of, like, I'm a higher rank than you, so I'm better than you. And not everyone's like this. Obviously, I've met some leaders that are like, yeah, just call me by my last name. You know, you don't have to call me ensign or lieutenant or whatever, unless, like you said, time and place. But yeah, I mean, there are some people that if you don't address them by their proper rank and rate, they will be extremely upset. And so it kind of like creates this level of like brainwashing, I guess, for lack of a better word, to where, like, even now, it's still like I see a rate and a rank, and all that higher ranking stuff next to someone's name, and my brain still goes there of like, can I talk to them a certain way? Because a lot of those higher ranking people are used to being talked to a certain way. And so now, I work with transitioning military members now. And so it has forced me to address a lot of those like internal things where I'm like, listen, like, these people need just as much help transitioning as I did. And the rank doesn't matter. So, yeah.
So you work currently with people who are transitioning out of the military. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've been very much involved in the military mental health space since at least since I got out in 2021. I like to say that my advocacy started in 2019 when I created my petition to the McPon. But when I was active, I didn't really do a whole lot with that. I was kind of in my own survival mode. So the petition just kind of, it's still out there on change.org. McPon's changed since then. So I don't have the current McPon's email address like I did the last McPon, so I don't know that's going directly to him. But petition's still out there for anyone who wants to sign it on change.org. But 2021, I started, the military mental health efforts with the podcast. It was 2022 where I started to rebrand my podcast slightly, and rebrand by adding on that, my mission has always been surrounding, people, being a voice for those who don't have a voice, sharing stories, all those things. But I wanted to add the aspect of changing the culture in the military, the DoD organizations. And I added that major part to my mission end of 2022 because I wanted to start looking at ways to take action. Well, the first way that I started was with an event called Bring a Buddy in my local community, where we just at a coffee shop, we sat down, we just normalized conversations surrounding mental health. It was a very, very small, intimate event that two of my friends showed up to that actually really needed to be there that day. So I'm really grateful that I held that event. But I was looking at other ways to start taking action. And I was like, I could go nationally, I could go globally, I could go locally. How do I want to tackle this action piece? And so I decided to start locally because of where I live. I live in Whidbey Island, Washington, which is an island county, Washington. Island County is comprised of Whidbey Island and Camano Island. They're the geographical setup of them is weird. You have to look at it on the map if you haven't seen it before. But Camano is actually like a whole hour away. You have to drive on the mainland to get there. But combined, the two have the highest per capita number of veterans in the entire state of Washington. And
Really?
the
Okay.
services, yes. And the services just don't exist here. The resources don't exist here. And so I kind of shifted my mindset from the reactive mental health to proactive mental health actually this year. And one of those major things is transition and reintegration. Transition being the part where they're leaving the military, reintegration being reintegrating these service members back into our communities. And so I connected with the guys with the San Diego Veterans Coalition, who had started this movement of facilities called CMVRs, so Center for Military and Veteran Reintegration, that are placed in communities, strategically placed in communities, to connect veterans and service members to resources. Well, there's this whole timeline leading up to even enrolling or being a part of the CMVR as a veteran. And part of that is transition. So there's this really cool app called Managing Your Transition Timeline. The website is mytt365.org, I think. And transitioning service members 2 years prior to separating can sign up for this app and get assigned to a transition manager. And so I'm a transition manager right now for probably about 6 different military members. I think one's Coast Guard, the rest are Navy, that are going to be separating anytime within the next month to 2 years from now. And I help walk them through that process. And I make sure that the app gives them a checklist of all the items that need to be done in transition. And so the ultimate goal is to start working with career counselors, give them access to this app too, because that takes a burden off of them. Now their tracking for transition goes onto a actual platform instead of checklists and sheets, and people stop falling through the cracks. The part of this timeline is also, with this app, that's one small piece of it. But there's also something that Maurice, he's with the San Diego Veterans Coalition. He hosts something called Reboot, which is reverse boot camp, which helps change the mindset from military to more of a civilian mindset, because boot camp sets our mindset to serve in the military, but no one is setting us up to not serve in the military. And so we look at these different areas where service members are failing outside of the military, in some losing their lives. I mean, the suicide rate in the veteran community is high. It changes all the time. 22 a day. I've heard 44 a day. I mean, I don't even think we really fully know what the statistics are, honestly. But the reason that I started working with transitioning service members, and I'm still kind of new to that space, is because my transition was not great. I didn't feel like I had the support that I needed. And again, it's not that the resources and support wasn't there. I just didn't know where to look. And so just being able to break that barrier to entry for people, I think alone is huge. But if we can be proactive on these things like homelessness, joblessness, suicide, I mean, then we don't have to start tackling these programs from a reactive state. We don't have to worry about, we don't have enough housing and jobs and mental health services. So what do we do with this person other than allow them to get to their tipping point and potentially take their life? Because we've already set them up for success and created a support network for them prior to them even separating from the military. And so that's been very much a huge part of my mission as of the last few months, as I start getting into more of that proactive piece. But yes, I think that working with transitioning service members and providing them support is so important. There's a CMVR. There's several currently down in Southern California. There's one that is in Quantico, Virginia, getting started up there hopefully soon. And then Whidbey Island, Washington. We are going to be starting one up hopefully in 2024 is the goal. But, the more communities that can get these Center for Military and Veteran Reintegration buildings, or even virtually, honestly, it can be done, the better.
Yeah, the way things have gone, virtually is definitely a good possibility to go, but there's still the aspect of going in person someplace. So I think that's actually really dope.
Yeah,
everyone has to start somewhere. This is like a version of TAPS, right? Because TAPS is like that little transition class that they give you, and that's not really for everybody. I mean, I think they do a pretty good job of giving you the basics of hey, these are the topics, and then that's pretty much it in my eyes. I haven't gone through it, so I can't personally speak for it. But for what you and your organization is doing to be able to give people the down and dirty of a longer scheme of things, not just a 3-day in classroom or a virtual class, which is honestly really good. There's so many resources out there for people to know, and this is one I've never heard of. So I really thank you so much for sharing this one. And I do hope at least one person out there, if 1,000 people listen, at least one person hears this and pursues it, and actually, good comes of it for them. So thank you very much, Rachel.
Yeah. And if you are listening, please make sure you still do TAPS, because it's still important. I didn't do it, so it's probably a bit hypocritical for me to say that. Also, at the time that I was separating, that is when TAPS was very virtual because of COVID and everything. So I just kind of did the quick click-through version JKO version, and I didn't get the full gist of what TAPS is supposed to be. But from what the people that I'm talking to, they're saying that TAP does what it's supposed to do. It's just not designed to fully help with that transition process. So, but if there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone separating, go and download the Managing Your Transition Timeline app 2 years prior to separation. I know it sounds really far out, but that's how much time you truly need. And actually work your way through the app, because I see a lot of people that will download it and they'll sit at 0%, 1% and stay very stagnant with it. But it is very useful. They've done a lot of studies and research on their model with the CMVR and the timeline, and they continue to do studies and research. I think they're about to launch into another study down in Southern California, just to continue to help people be more successful after service. And it's hard to realize how much the military mindset affects us until we're veterans, and then we're like, oh, well, I didn't think that I needed that much support, but I really do. So,
like,
just something.
No one told me where to be tomorrow.
Right? Yeah, it's like an overwhelming.
No one told me where to be tomorrow, and like, what do I wear?
Yeah, it's like an overwhelming amount of freedom that like I wasn't expecting. And I think the other thing too is like I expected that I was going to go back to the person I was before I joined the military, but I was a completely different person. And it's like you have to get to know this new person and where this new person belongs in the world. And I was not prepared for that. And I think a lot of people aren't prepared for that. So, yeah, we could go on a tangent for just talking about transition for the next hour.
Transition is a good one, and maybe when I hop on your episode, we'll be able to talk about that. So, Rachel, quick shout out to yourself. If someone wants to listen to you and your story and your podcast and everything you're doing, where would they be able to do all that?
Yeah, so ysdeh.com is the best place. That's my website. It for some reason the recent episodes aren't updating on there, but you can get the links to my Apple and Spotify through that website. You can also just directly search me on your favorite podcasting platform. Your story doesn't end here. And then a quick other shout out. I just recently started a mental health and self-care blog called Soul Serenity. So soulserenityhub.com is the website for that. And I do have a veterans hub on there that'll be posting some specific veterans, just mental health blogs, tips, resources on there too. But that's the best place to find me is through the website or through really any social media, either YSDEH or _YSDEH.
Nice. That's dope. I love that. Rachel, do you have any things you want to ask me before we end the episode?
I don't think so. My daughter just woke up here, so I'm wrangling a toddler at the moment.
You're good. And I was kind of wondering if I should ask this question or not. So for anyone listening that is curious to what Rachel was going to say and what my response would be, we're going to do a part 2 of this on her platform. So please, if you're listening to this episode and you're at the end, just know her episode will be available too. My episode on her platform will be available too. So I just want to say thank you, Rachel. I'm excited to hop on your platform and have a little fun with that. I really do appreciate you coming out here today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, of course. Freedom Empire. Until next time, take care. Brush your hair.
Views presented are those of the speaker, and the guest do not necessarily represent the views of the Department of Defense or its components. Neither the Department of Defense or its components bears any responsibility for the accuracy, legality, or content of the views discussed on this podcast. Now, without further ado, let's get into this.